How's it going, guys? In this video, I'm going to show you how to install the Zippy spacers and handle inlays in the Revo Nexus. You can see I've already got one Zippy spacer installed. So in this video, we're going to install the second one and the inlays. We'll save the inlays for last. First, I'm going to unscrew the pivot screw, and then I'm going to undo both screws on the spacer. I'm going to lift the slab up and take the stock stainless steel spacer out. At this point, if you wanted to, you could install the Zippy spacer. While I've got it cracked open, I'm actually gonna use some white lithium grease on the bearings. I find that for bearings that are not on race washers or milled washers, white lithium grease is a really nice way to not only lubricate it, protect from dirt and rust, but slow down the bearings, have a much more controlled swing, more akin to bushings. So first I'm gonna pop the blade off here, dump out. Actually, let me wipe any dirt off here. On that one, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the blade and the pivot. All right, so actually I'm going to wipe this down too. Clean is good. That's especially true for bushing knives with very tight tunes, but bearing knives benefit a great deal from being clean as well. All right, so that's in. I'm gonna put some white lithium grease here in the pocket. And then with the smooth side of the bearings, not the open cage side, the smooth side facing up towards the blade, I'm gonna pop that on. Pop my blade back on. The hidden Zen pin fell out, I'm gonna reinstall that. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of white lithium grease to this side of the blade for the bearing to sit on. And then smooth side facing towards the blade with the open cage side facing up, away from the blade. I'm gonna put it on and add some more white lithium grease. I essentially want the whole bearing to be caked, which it will be once I install the top slab. At this point, I'm going to take the Zippy spacer and install it. Should just pop right in. And I'm going to replace the top slab, making sure the washer's still installed there. Pop the slab back on. I'm making sure that this side of the sex bolt is in place properly. They use a keyed system so that you don't get spinning pivots. So it's imperative that when you tighten this down, everything's in the correct place. So now I'm going to screw this pivot screw back in until I feel a light resistance. I'm not going to go further than that. And now I'm going to start screwing in the spacer. So I'm going to take one of the spacer screws and I'm going to push down on the slab on top of the spacer very firmly, basically as hard as I can push without hurting myself, the table, or anyone around me. I'm going to push down as hard as I can and then screw it in. Let me see if I can get you guys a better camera angle there. So I'm screwing this in until I feel a pretty hard, firm resistance. And when I feel that, I'm going to keep going a little bit, pushing as hard as I can and screwing this in. Nice and slowly with a lot of pressure. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Applying as much force and pressure as I feel comfortable doing as I screw this in. The screws are threading directly into the polyurethane and creating their own threads. It's very secure and requires a lot of force to do. All right, now what I'm gonna do, unfold this. I should comment actually. I do recommend taping the blade during this installation so you don't accidentally cut yourself, as I have done. So now what I'm gonna do, you won't be able to see this on camera, but I'm gonna hold this with a light source behind it. In my case, it's the window that way. And I'm gonna make sure that there's no cracks of light peeking in between the spacer and any of the slabs. So I'm just gonna double check. And I am getting some cracks of light when I hold this up to a window, and that means I need to screw in more. So I'm now holding this very tight, and I'm gonna screw this, quarter of a turn, rotate, screw the other side, maybe a full turn, feels like it needs more pressure, and repeat that process maybe one more time. It's feeling very tight, and now I'm gonna hold it up to the window again to check that there's no light peeking through, and I see no light at all peeking through. For most of y'all, that'll be the end of this installation. I like to be very thorough. If you have calipers, I do recommend using them. Before we do, I'm going to ensure that I have tightened the pivot screw properly. I'll tighten it and then check for play. It's a bearing knife. There should be zero pivot play. If you have any pivot play on a bearing knife, either there's something wrong with the knife itself or you haven't tightened it or cleaned it properly. So I have zero play right now, and I'm just gonna check the swing. The swing's a little tight, so I've over-tightened it. I can feel it binding. Really what you're going for in a bearing knife is no binding at all. It shouldn't feel grindy. You should have a perfectly smooth swing with zero play. If you have any handle wiggle, I like to tighten that out. And this feels pretty good. I'm gonna loosen it a little bit more. And that feels really smooth to me. It's a lot slower. Let me see if I can reproduce it. If I didn't have the lithium grease, it would swing like really fast. With the lithium grease, it's a lot slower, more controlled. Personally, I find many executions of bearings to be too fast for my preference. Again, it's all personal preference. And the way around this is to have a perfectly good tune with no binding, no play, and then adding some white lithium grease. It's gonna be much higher viscosity than most oil-based lubricants that we use in this hobby. And now I'm just finishing up cleaning up the excess lithium grease so I don't get it on my fingers or my pocket if I decide to carry this. Looks clean to me. One final swing test, one final play test. Zippy, you missed a spot. Nailed it. And of course, it's a bearing knife, so you should have 0 play. And you should have a perfect swing. Feels really smooth, no grinding. The swing feels a lot closer to bushings. And so I really do recommend, if you guys want to flip a bearing knife, use white lithium grease. It's especially on like wrist passes where you need it pretty controlled to avoid getting cut. All right, so that concludes the installation of the spacers. These are about 1/4 of the weight of the stock spacers, so the balance is much more neutral now, which I like. These holes are just for weight reduction. There's no adjustable weights on this model. One thing I do like to do though, I did tease you guys the calipers. I'm getting 3.85 millimeters at the pivot, and I will just like to check that I'm getting close. Yeah, so when I'm within 0.05 millimeters, that's pretty good. I might loosen this a tad and then redo the light trick. Okay, I loosened it a little bit. I'm not seeing any light through. And now I'm pretty much spot on. I'm off by maybe 0.02 millimeters, and that's good enough. As long as you're having no play with a smooth swing and the handles look parallel and it's within, 0.05 millimeters, it's 1/20th of a millimeter, you should be good to go. For most of y'all, you don't really need the calipers. When this is tightened according to these instructions, it gets pretty much dead on anyway, but I like to be thorough. All right, so let's go ahead and install the inlays now. Here you can see I've got some glow-in-the-dark inlays. They're translucent clear under natural light. This is the smooth finish. The default finish is textured, which has like a pitted, mottled appearance. I'm trying to get the lighting good for you guys so you can see the difference here. So you can see the smooth is like sort of a glassy finish, and then the textured finish is this kind of pitted, rough texture. However, the smooth one, ironically, does offer a better grip. It has a higher friction coefficient, so keep that in mind when you order. I also find the smooth looks nicer, but it's quite a bit more challenging for me to make, so it does cost a bit extra. So these, much like the cutouts, which are thinner, closer to the pivot, and wider, closer to the end of the handle, the inlays are too. So make sure you've got the narrow side facing towards the pivot, and I'm gonna pop it in, and then it's gonna bow out. I'm just gonna pop in the end, and then I'm gonna press it in. And I'm gonna repeat that process for all of them. All of the cutouts, pushing it in here, close to the pivot. The other end is bowing out, and I'm going to use my thumb to smooth it out. I'm going to do all 4 here. I don't really flip much at night with glow-in-the-dark, but I do think the translucent clear has a very striking appearance in just normal daylight, so that's why I'm using it. You'll notice in a deviation from some of my other handle inlay models, I've recessed the inlay several tenths of a millimeter so that the cutout still offers a bit of grip in conjunction with the high friction of the inlay itself. This was the grippiest configuration that I found in my testing. All right, that's the end of the video, guys. We have successfully installed the very lightweight Zippy spacers with jimping that lighten up the Balisong, but more importantly, give it a more neutral balance away from the stock, very handle biased. And we installed the Inlays, which offer grip and look rather nice. Thanks for watching, guys.